If you spend a lot of time in certain sections of the media, you could be forgiven for thinking that heat pumps are an untested technology, completely ineffective, or frankly evil. There are some people in our country that believe that heat pumps are a technology being forced on the unwilling British public for some nefarious reason. Well, you might be listening to us at Elite Renewables and thinking, yeah, well, of course you're biased, you're heat pump installers. So today we want to introduce you to someone who is not from Elite Renewables. This is Maddie, and Maddie's a client of Elite Renewables. We installed a heat pump for her a few years ago, and since then Maddie has become a bit of a heat pump advocate. She's not only given talks and lectures to people about the benefits of living with a heat pump, she invites people into her home via visitaheatpump.com to come and experience what it's actually like. And today we're going to sit down with Maddie and run through some of the most common objections and misconceptions that people have about living with a heat pump to get her take on them.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, so I trained originally as a process engineer. So the technology of heat pumps seems fairly straightforward to me. They're very efficient, they use less energy, cleaner than gas. It just seemed obvious that when they became widely available for homes, people would choose to have a heat pump rather than a gas boiler because of all the advantages. And for most people who have to make a decision about a new heating system, I think it'd be really helpful if they had more factual information and more truthful information on which they could make a balanced decision rather than suffering from all these misconceptions and frankly myths, possibly untruths, which are being published far too often and making it more difficult for people. We'd like it to be easy for people to make a good decision. They're not expensive to run, they're not noisy, they're reliable, your house is nice and warm, so there's really no reason that people shouldn't have the chance to get a heat pump if their boiler is coming to the end of its life and they want to choose a system that might even be cheaper to run.
And Maddie, it's worth saying, isn't it, that there is no incentive for you to do this. We're not paying you, we're not persuading you to say any of this stuff. You're doing this off your own back. You don't stand to gain financially from anything about heat pumps.
No, I don't get paid by anybody. I'm a trustee at a charity which is interested in the transition, but that's an unpaid job. I just got really, really annoyed that people were being lied to and that they weren't able to make a good decision. And somebody needs to stand up and say, these things are not true, so please stop publishing them.
According to Abis Dad in the Daily Mail comments section, heat pumps absorb heat from the ground and heat from the outside air. But what heat would that be then? I've just gone outside and it's 4 degrees. I bet if I dug a hole in the garden a couple of feet down, the ground temperature will be colder. They need to rewrite this as heat pumps absorb cold from the ground and cold from the air. So Maddie, I guess the question here from Abis Dad and others is heat pump technology really able to provide heating during cold British winters?
Well, they've got heat pumps installed all over Scandinavia, Canada, many parts of Europe, running all the way up to the Arctic. And I think that probably covers most of the climatic conditions we get in the UK. So I really don't think that's the case, really. And you've got to realise that 0 degrees Celsius is just arbitrary. There's still heat in the ground well below 0 degrees Celsius, and that heat has come from the summer suns shining on the earth all summer. So there's a lot of it, and the heat pump is quite capable of retrieving it and putting it in your house. If you are going to get a heat pump and you want it to work in the British winters, there are much better questions to ask your installer. So you might want to ask, how does it defrost itself when you've had a period of damp weather? Because they tend to frost up like the back of a freezer does, and it will be producing condensate. Ask your installer how they're going to manage that. Are they going to drop it on the floor? Where's it going to drain away to? That's a good question to ask.
Yeah, of course. So in the winter, when you start getting below a certain temperature, I think it's usually 3 degrees, your heat pump will start to obviously condense, but because the air is quite cold, it will actually attach onto the evaporator fins, essentially, and that doesn't let air pass through those fins, which is a problem because the heat pump works off air. It's kind of different for different manufacturers. For example, Wiesmann units, they have an internal unit with a buffer vessel dedicated for defrosting, so it doesn't steal any of the internal heat from the building. It actually has its own dedicated vessel to do that defrost. So you get different manufacturers doing different things, but they all generally need to take some heat from the system, not a lot, just enough to defrost the heat pump, and then it goes back into its normal operation mode. A byproduct of that is condensation that falls basically onto the drip tray of the heat pump, and then that gets routed on to the nearest drain point.
And you might want to ask whether they've set up the right temperature compensation curve for where your house is. It's going to be different in Aberdeen and Brighton because they're different places with different climates. So that's an important thing to get right because it makes your heat pump more efficient. These are good questions for your installer. If you set the compensation curve, you've got to remember that this is something that gas boilers just can't do. So gas boilers are not at their most efficient all the time, depending on the outside temperature.
Compensation curves are fairly important depending on where the property is. Some areas will be colder, for example, in winter. Some areas won't be as kind of deep into the minuses. As the temperature drops outside, the heat pump needs to understand and know this change, and also kind of factor that in when the heating comes on inside. So most heat pumps, when they're installed, they will be installed to certain factory settings, as well as have weather compensating, which is essentially noticing what's going on outside the house and changing the heating system or heating based on that.
You could also ask your installer, are you insulating the external pipework with external grade insulation? Because that's going to make it much more hard wearing and long lasting when it's out in the elements all year round. And that's a really simple thing at installation that will make sure your system lasts for a long time.
I think there is things that can be done to make it a bit better, that we are learning over time that there is other types of insulation that you can install. There's types of protective boxes that you can put the insulation in. You can at least put sort of UV protective and weatherproof insulation on these days.
So according to really 0000 in the Daily Mail comments section, they are looking forward to the evening hum across the land when these heat pumps kick in. It's also a shame that they don't work very well. Great for hot water, but for heating a house other than underfloor heating, they are a no-go. So Maddie, what do you say to that? Because there is a concern that people have over the noise that heat pumps generate. Are they going to be unable to open the windows because there's this horrendous hum that's going on all day and all night?
Well, you only need to stand next to a working heat pump at somebody's home to realise that that's just not true. And of course you can do that with the visitor heat pump scheme. So if you really want to see one in person yourself, that's the thing to do, because a video is never going to answer this question for you really. In fact, if a heat pump is noisy, then it's either faulty or it was badly installed, and you can do things about that. You need to get someone in and you need to get it put right.
For example, we've noticed that if they're not quite flat, then you'll get a bit more wear on the bearings, which can produce noise over time. So it has to be installed completely on a flat base. So I think it is an indication that something is wrong.
And if you can hear a noise, you've got to remember that it may be the heat pump, but it may be something about your neighbour's house that's noisy, like the tumble dryer outlet or their gas boiler outlet, or something that they do as a hobby. And inside your own house, it may not be the fan unit. It could be the central heating circulating pump, which is just giving off vibration. And that's something that can be fixed with normal things that they've always ever done for gas heated systems. You know, your central heating shouldn't be noisy. If it is, get somebody who knows to come and fix it for you.
The heat pumps aren't noisy anymore, they're very quiet. I would actually say that they are quieter than a modern gas boiler. If you were to stand by a gas boiler that's firing up, it is quite loud. So the noise is not coming from the heat pump, it's more likely to be from an aeroplane or local traffic.
So Maddie, we're outside your heat pump and it is on now. If you had to describe the noise, how would you describe this experience?
We can just talk to each other, can't we? It's really very, very quiet. If I walk round the side of the house to the terrace, I can't hear it at all. I think it's probably important to say that it is running. It's not running at full speed because it's variable speed. So when there's a low load and it's just doing a little bit of work, which is frankly when you might be in the garden because the weather's nicer, it's going to be able to adjust to that and be even quieter. In the middle of winter when it's working quite hard, hopefully you're not sitting in the garden in a deck chair.
To illustrate the level of noise it's producing right now, if I rub my hands, you'll hear how loud it is compared to the sound of the heat pump.
I do have to add, any self-respecting homemaker is not going to accept a piece of kit that's noisy.
That's true.
So if any woman is involved who's trying to make a nice environment for her family, she's going to insist that they're quiet. And that's what's driving the industry to give us these nice quiet units.
Maddie, to make sure that somebody doesn't get a noisy heat pump, what are the questions that they should be asking their installer?
Well, I think number one, ask them what the maximum decibel output is and compare that to something you know, like a tumble dryer, because that will give you a sense for that. A lot of heat pumps are variable speed as well. So ask if it's a variable speed unit, because when it's not working so hard, the fan will slow down and the amount of noise will go down.
So fixed speed units tend to be noisier than your variable speed, because if you're using 25% capacity, it means the compressor only has to run at 25% of the speed. The airflow rate through the unit doesn't have to be as much either, so variable speed compressors tend to be a bit quieter as well, and the startup isn't as demanding either. Most air source heat pumps are variable speed because most small domestic heat pumps, that's 3 kilowatt up to sort of 16 kilowatts, they'll all be variable speed because your house demand does shift during it's a seasonal demand effectively, so you don't need to whack on 16 kilowatts if your house only needs sort of 4 kilowatts. So you have a variable speed compressor in there that's going to be adjusting your output based on what your house needs. Where you have fixed speed units, usually they're a lot, it's older technology to be fair, but you'd normally find fixed speed in much bigger sort of commercial applications like big ground source heat pumps. They're a little bit different and you need big buffers to work on those as well, because it's either 0 or 100%. You don't get anything in between. Fixed speed are generally more reliable, but it's a simpler machine and they're not quite as efficient as a variable speed, because there's the benefit is you don't have to use the entire capacity, you only use what you need, and that generally is more efficient doing it that way.
Some units come on and off to keep the buffer tank topped up during the day, and that can feel very random. So you might want to ask your installer whether that's the normal operation of this unit, whether it can be timed to happen at night when you're not sitting out drinking gin and tonics. Get them to talk to you about the normal behaviour of when it's actually running.
The heat pumps can all be scheduled to run at heating and hot water periods that you choose, whether that's at night or during the day, or off-peak times to utilise cheap tariffs.
For anyone with solar PV, of course you can use that to heat your hot water in the summer. Your heating is off. It's very likely your heat pump will just be sitting idle most of the summer, occasionally just circulating a bit. But you won't have any noise because it's not running. And that's a really important consideration. Or you might be able to have an immersion heater that runs on low-cost energy to heat water overnight, and that would also mean that your heat pump isn't running in the summer when you're sleeping with the windows open and you don't want any noise at all because you actually like a bit of peace and quiet. There are options and you have to ask your installer about them.
If you're thinking about a heat pump, solar, battery, MVHR or air conditioning for your property, then contact us at Elite Renewables. You can give us a ring on 020 8706 0056, or you can contact us through our website at eliterenewables.co.uk. We make the process really simple, so we'll have an initial chat where we'll be able to give you a ballpark estimate for your project. We'll then send one of our technical team over to your property to visit you, to understand the property in a bit more detail, and to conduct a detailed survey so that we can give you an exact quote. Contact us by giving us a ring or dropping us an email through our website today.